I think we're underappreciating how fragile things are.
The global financial crisis, that was 2008, 2009. I can't tell you how many economists said that could never happen. It happened in the Great Depression, never going to happen again. Winding up to today, that the U.S. can never run into problems with its debt, because that never happens. But it did. It doesn't mean we know what's going to happen looking at history. But I think if you don't look at history, you forget what could happen.
Wow, the system is shakier than it looks. I don't know. Am I right about that, sir? Am I wrong about that? What say you? Welcome to Open Book. I am your host, Anthony Scaramucci. Joining us today, a best-selling author, New York Times best-selling author, Professor Ken Rogoff. He's a professor of economics at Harvard University and a former International Monetary Fund chief economist. The title of the book, Our Dollar, Your Problem, an insider's view of 7 turbulent decades of global finance and the road ahead. What a great title, though. Our Dollar, Your Problem. Ken, it's always a pleasure to be with you. Before we dive into this book, which is very timely, our listeners may not know your full background. We get a lot of young people on this podcast. So before the Harvard chair and the IMF credentials, give us a little bit about your journey and what shaped your view of global finance before you got into those more august positions.
Well, I worked at the Federal Reserve. That was my first job as an economist. I was a very junior economist. I think I met Paul Volcker. He was the chair once when I accidentally sat in his seat at lunch, and he is like 6'7", and I'm looking up at, and he goes, "That's my chair." But I didn't have a lot of other influence, but I did. I wrote the first paper about why you should have an independent central bank back then. And then other things, but I had the office next to Ben Bernanke's. He was the Fed chair later at Princeton for a long time. Actually, in graduate school, we were office mates. And then I was a professional chess player in my youth. I represented the United States in the World Chess Championships, if you can believe that. That was a long time ago.
I first met you actually at the World Economic Forum. I came to hear you speak a few times. And then you wrote a great book. This has got to be 15 or 16 years ago now, called This Time is Different, which is about the, centuries of financial crises and how we handle financial crises. And it really influenced my investment theories. And it was, your suggestions about the Fed centrism and so forth in the book really helped me and probably other macro investors see the post-global financial crisis landscape. And so now this book, I feel like after reading that book a long time ago and reading this book recently, I feel like they're bookends in some ways. I just want to test that theory on you because we did something to the dollar. We used our flexibility, if you will, with interest rates, Operation Twist, quantitative easing, et cetera. And it's now put the rest of the world in a little bit of an imposition. And you have a great quote in this book, which actually becomes your title of this book, is from John Connally. And for those that may remember John Connally, in addition to being a former Treasury Secretary, he was also wounded in the Kennedy assassination. He was the governor of Texas and wounded in 1963, November. But one of the lines he had was the dollar is our currency, but your problem. Why is this so relevant today? Given the and take us, if you don't mind, from the first book into this now aftermath of the financial crisis, 15, 16 years out.
This absolutely is a follow-up in some ways to the first book and about things that have happened since. And the title of the first book, This Time is Different, is supposed to be ironic. That people say, oh, don't worry about inflation. It's never going to happen again. China's growing to the moon. Hey, they're never going to have a problem. Look at how great they run their country. And something that's very pertinent today, even beside the dollar, is interest rates are super low. They're going to be super low forever. So I certainly hit on these themes where I appreciate your history shirt, by the way. Where people look at, 10, 20 years and they think they've looked at everything that could ever happen. But a lot of times you need a longer arc of history because The global financial crisis, that was 2008, 2009. I can't tell you how many economists said that could never happen. It happened in the Great Depression, 1930s, never going to happen again. And then winding up to today, that the U.S. can never run into problems with its debt because that never happens, but it did, back in the 1930s. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's very important. It doesn't mean we know what's going to happen looking at history, but I think if you don't look at history, you forget what could happen.
I agree with all of that. I guess the thing that vexes me is we have these policy decisions that make it easy for our politicians. And I've heard you on other interviews, and I was dying to ask you this question. Will there be a Fed? And obviously, there's a Fed right now that's being somewhat resistant to the Trump administration, doesn't want to get steamrolled by the Trump administration, wants to stay data dependent. But I would say the Fed, sir, and I would say the corruption of the dollar, if you don't mind me saying it that way, the Fed has given the politicians a little bit of an easy way out over the last 15 or 20 years. Is that just going to be the thing that happens? Will there be something deus ex machina that changes that? Or if you disagree with my observation of this, tell me why.
No, I think you're right. I don't think it's easy for the Fed to exercise its independence year in and year out when it's really under attack. And obviously, with the Trump administration, he's very blunt. He doesn't just say, I want Powell out. He says, I want to run it. I think I know better, not just than Powell, all the governors on the Fed. You should listen to me. And, that we could be right. I mean, we never know, but, it's a recipe for disaster. And the Fed has bent over the years. So when the title of the book, Our Dollar, Your Problem, comes from this period where we went off gold completely. We were kind of half off it, but we went off it completely. And that just led to the 70s. We got this huge inflation. And the Fed bent. They accommodated it. And you're absolutely right that under, the last 15 years, I don't want to get into the weeds here, but they basically bought up treasury bills by the, trillion. And that's held down interest rates. There's no question, but it doesn't work forever. So they bent to the government's will. But now, the government wants more. And just lastly, independent central banks is a new thing. It's not been around forever. I actually wrote the first paper on it, believe it or not. And, politicians have never liked it. The left doesn't like it either. If Harris had won and the progressives had their way, they wanted to get rid of the Fed too. So, yeah, I'm worried about it.
I think I don't know. I guess I'm a Wall Street centric person. I've spent my most of my life on Wall Street. I feel like the independence of the Fed is something that is sacrosanct on Wall Street, which is why I think guys like Besant and others have gone to Trump. Steve Schwartzman has gone to Trump and said, knock it off, where Trump is now saying he's not going to fire Chairman Powell. But I want to play a very smuggy, I'm going to do some improvisation with you. I'm going to play a very smuggy politician / Fed economist. I'm going to test something out on you. I want you to respond to it.
Okay.
Okay. And so this is the what me worry smug Fed economist or a politician. What me worry, there's no other country like the United States. We have a 50-state free trading bloc, single currency, lots of flexibility in the country, lots of economic dynamism, lots of innovation. The Chinese are not going to be the dominant currency. The euro is really, let me just sniff at the euro for a second derogatorily. It's a fixed exchange rate mechanism more than it is a unified currency. And so what me worry as an American politician or a smuggy Fed economist about the potential demise of the dollar? What am I missing? Obviously, I'm setting this up for you, sir. What am I missing as Mr. Smug in terms of my feeling about America?
I love you're doing that because part of what really motivated me to write the book is I read the smugness, not just from politicians, but economic commentators. We are the greatest. There's nowhere else to go. But, we had the 70s when the dollar, Europe was the center of the dollar bloc in the just before then. We didn't have China. We didn't have Latin America. It was Europe. We lost Europe. We've lost it forever. we're, I think, going to lose a bunch of Asia if we screw up, which is half the dollar block. In the 1930s, we defaulted on our debt. Something, when we write the history books, we say we didn't, but we changed the price of gold from $20 an ounce to $35 an ounce. And if you were in London or in India holding dollars, kind of felt like a default. Of course we've defaulted. And the Supreme Court ultimately ruled it a default. So, there's this idea, again, not looking at history, that we just do whatever we want. We can run our debt to the moon. We can get rid of Fed independence. They're never going to get rid of us. It doesn't mean somebody's going to replace the dollar. That's not what happened in those episodes. But we lose a lot of our market. That means our interest rates are higher and our ability to use the dollar for sanctions and all this other stuff also drops. So we would feel that. And I think it's something that might have been going to happen anyway over a couple decades. But Trump is an accelerant of that process. There's no doubt about it.
You ever realize that you need to hire somebody yesterday? That's definitely happened to me before, and I wish I had used Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed's sponsored jobs, your listing jumps right to the top, so the right people actually see it, and fast. In fact, sponsored jobs on Indeed get 45% more applications than non-sponsored ones, according to Indeed data. One of the things I love about Indeed is how fast it makes hiring, and if I had this back then, I have saved several weeks of stress. And the best part, no subscriptions, no long-term contracts, just pay for results. Want to know how fast? In the minute I've been talking, 23 hires were made on Indeed. That's not hype, that's Indeed's data. There's no need to wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. Listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/openbook. Go to Indeed.com/openbook and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/openbook. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, Indeed is all you need. So 5 years from now, sir, where do you think we are? Fed, U.S. dollar? Is it more of the same? Are we going to be able to print 2 to 3 trillion, another 10 to 15 trillion dollars of deficit spending? Or are you able to do that ad infinitum? You've written about, and I've heard you speak about, the corrosive effects of inflation and the regressive form of taxation that inflation represents. So, take us out 5 years. Tell me where we are, or tell me where you think we could be and what we should be worried about.
5 years, and I'm happy to come back on in 5 years. But I think in 5 years, we will have had some form of debt crisis. And it'll either take the form that instead of the Fed buying up $7 trillion in debt, they're buying up $25 trillion in debt, which is basically what Japan did, in their situation. We could have a burst of inflation. We could partially default on some of our debt, which Trump cabinet has talked about. But I think we're going to come under pressure. Now, Jamie Dimon, I'm sure you know, said we're going to see a crack in the bond market. And I think he's right that at some point there'll be some, what we economists call nonlinearity, some sudden event. But I think what will happen before that is interest rates, long-term interest rates, are going to start creeping up. And Trump is president. He's very blunt, as you well know. But I think whoever's president's not going to like that. And then we start getting closer to what Jamie Dimon is talking about. But I think it will have happened within 5 years. I mean, in the book, I said 5 to 7 years. I would have rather you threw me 7 years. But I think 5 years, more likely than not, that's going to happen. Yeah, and it's not going to be pleasant for us. It's not going to be pleasant for the world.
I want you to react to this, sir. I was doing a little research. I'm trying to explain I grew up, as you know, in a blue-collar working class family. And a lot of working class people don't understand inflation because, the number goes up. So in other words, if my parents buy a house for $16,000 in 1962 and Zillow says that their house is worth $750,000 today, they feel richer. But I said to my parents over the dinner table, your house was 457 ounces of gold. Gold at $35 an ounce in 1962. Today, I could purchase that house on Zillow for 250 ounces of gold. It actually goes down in value from a gold per ounce perspective. And when I told my parents that, they got mad at me because, again, they want to feel the inflation makes, even though they're not richer, and even though the purchasing power has been woefully skewed since we took ourselves off the gold standard. How do you explain inflation to people that are not economists? Obviously, I majored in economics at Tufts. I've been in the markets for 36 years. You're one of the scions of economic theory. How do you explain it to somebody that is not us? Or how do you explain to somebody that's the man or woman on the street?
Okay, not an easy question. I will say on the gold, which is an easy question, when Franklin Roosevelt put it from 20 to 35, people thought that was scandalous, making the dollar worthless. And I don't know what it is as we speak, but it hit 1,000 times that recently.
Yeah, it's 3,000. It's 3,000.
3,000, 3,000. Yeah, I mean, just incredible. And you could point to a lot of things of how much inflation we've had. So, their prices go up and down. It's hard to control it exactly. Where we get concerned is where everything's going up. It happened in the pandemic. I mean, we saw pretty significant inflation, not as bad as in the 70s, believe it or not, but it was pretty significant. I think what people have trouble with is that, you go like the price of paper towels goes up from $10 to $25, and then it stays at, depends on where you buy it, at like $18 or $20. And the Fed says, it's great, we solved it. And we say, what are you talking about? It's not $10 anymore. I don't feel like you solved it. So I think it is very upsetting, even to me as an economist. And I do go grocery shopping. I just can't get used to it. I know, I read the numbers. I know how much inflation went up. I kind of know, and by the way, believe me, my salary at Harvard did not go up that much, but yours maybe did. But, I look at the things, when's it going to come down? I buy a loaf of bread. It had been this exact same loaf. It had been $3.50, and I just went and it's $6. And the Fed says, well, inflation has stopped. So I think it's definitely very distressing of how much it jumbles around prices. But what the Fed's supposed to do is not make you think about it. Like, there are little changes here and there. You feel good when your salary goes up a little bit. You don't notice when other things. But it's exactly when we're talking about it that they've got it wrong.
So well said. If I said to you that gold over the last 25 years, gold has outperformed the S&P 500, the best 500 companies in the United States, what would your reaction be to that?
Well, I mean, I follow it.
Right.
So I don't follow everything, but I follow that one. And, I think that partly reflects that central banks around the world, people around the world, don't trust currencies. And that's just sort of common sense. I mean, it's absolutely some of the demand for crypto also. They don't trust the government. And if you're China, you really don't trust the United States. Look at the sanctions they're putting on everyone. So, there's a lot of reasons gold has gone up, but I like to say gold is the new gold. There are reasons it's done very well. It's the new reserve currency. I mean, if China could buy more of it, they would. So it's been remarkable, but I wouldn't say it shocked me. Every time gold goes up and the smug people say only stupid people buy gold, they're nuts. I mean, I actually tell central banks, I tell high net worth individuals at least, of course you should hold some gold. I mean, it's a diversification at the very least. I don't know you're going to outperform the S&P 500 again. You got to pick the dates to make that work. But yeah, it's remarkable.
I love the book because it took me down through some history that I didn't fully understand or appreciate. It also explained the fallibility, which you and I, as we get older, Ken, we know how fallible we are, right? It took me down the road of fallibility, where as a younger man, I would have talked with more certainty about things, and a lot of different things are going on here. what I love about your writings, you don't just write from the ivory tower. You're sitting across from policymakers and heads of state, central bankers, and so forth. And when I closed the book, I was like, wow, the system is shakier than it looks. And I don't know, am I right about that, sir? Or I mean, Ken, or am I wrong about that? I feel like the system is, I think we're under appreciating how fragile things are. What say
I,
you?
I absolutely. A few decisions differently at different times. The world could have gone a lot differently. The financial crisis could be worse. And I make a big point in the book of how lucky we were as Americans that it wasn't all how great we were. Europe made a bad mistake putting Greece in the euro, that they went from 26% of reserves to even now, only 20% of reserves. China decided to peg to the dollar and stuck to it too long. And you can go back to mistakes that Japan made, where they let us beat up on them more than they needed to. So you can point at mistakes where we've, risen very high. And I also think Americans don't realize it has been coming down for a while. Like your luck kind of, you get to control everything and your luck can start turning against you. And I think we're in a world today where our luck really could turn against us. I mean, some of the stuff we're doing, the tariff war, the war on the rule of law, part of why people like to hold American assets is you trust our courts. You don't think some presidents...
Decentralized safe system is being stress tested right now.
Exactly. A centralized system is not as safe. You're not looking to hold your money in a place where one person can decide, to upend you. So, I think there are a lot of concerns, and I think investors around the world have them.
All right, I'm down to the 5 words. And what we do is our very famous 5 words. I pick 5 words out of the book, and I ask our authors to opine. You give me a sentence or two. If I say the word inflation to you, you say what?
It's going to happen again.
You see, when I hear the word inflation, I think regressive tax. It really pains me because that's really what
for sure
what happens.
For sure. Very regressive, because richer people know how to get around it.
Exactly, and richer people can hold assets. My poor dad, he made his money with his time and labor. You're literally taking a part of his life away from him, and without any hedge, unfortunately. When I say China, you say what?
It's not going to surpass the United States and this whole idea of a second China shock, and it's all over. They're amazing. It's formidable, but they're probably not even growing now. And I think they're headed for a long period of working their way out, probably eventually need to get rid of one-man rule themselves.
I say crypto, you say what?
I say tremendous innovation, but still the Wild West. I want to see a regulatory system, which I think would benefit crypto in the long run. What do you think? You're way more on top of this than I am.
Well, I mean, this is my podcast to talk to you, Ken Rogoff. But obviously I'm a bull on things like Bitcoin. I'm a bull on the future of digital. I just think that, Paul Atkins, who's a friend of mine, was explaining this earlier today on Squawk Box, that our rail system can take us to T0, which is trades can happen and be affected on the same day. When I started in the business, they were T5, which was 5 trading days. They're now T1. And so, again, even Jamie, who thinks that Bitcoin is a Ponzi scheme, Jamie Dimon, who I think is one of the smartest people in our industry, accepts that there's going to be a role for the blockchain in the future of financial transactions. So I'm bullish. Well, let's talk about
you'd have to have your head in the sand not to think blockchains go by. Yeah, exactly. I think what people don't appreciate about Bitcoin the most is that there's a role in the global underground economy, which isn't all illegal. It's mostly tax evasion. And also in emerging markets where, again, they don't like the dollar. It's an asset people can hold. You're in an emerging market. Yes. You don't want your government to be able to take it away from you.
Yeah, and I think that's people in the West who, even though we have inflation and we're talking about all this in your book, people in the West don't realize the pain that African citizens feel from their governments as they wipe out their net worth through their currencies, or things going on in South America. So there's a market outside of the Western liberal democracies for these assets. So, all right, last 2 words. Okay, the second to last, power. I say the word power, sir. You say what?
Well, I think the dollar has been an incredible instrument of power, and some of the policies that we're engaging in now are taking it for granted, and we're going to miss it when it's gotten weaker.
The last word, and you get the last word on the last word, U.S. dollar.
The US dollar is going to get knocked down a couple notches. We were luckier than we think to get where we are. But the way we're running the show on our debt, undermining Fed independence, trade wars, the dollar is not going to have the same stature in 10 years. No one will replace it, but it's going to have a much lower market share.
Well, I always enjoy my time with you, Professor
Same.
Ken Rogoff. It's always and this is a rigorous book, and I really encourage people to read it. It's very readable. You got a great writing style, but it also has reinforced for me some of the things I've been thinking about in terms of my investment thesis and where the world's going and what policies we could have in the U.S. to improve our position. So thank you for writing it. The title of the book is Our Dollar, Your Problem, an insider's view of 7 turbulent decades of global finance and the road ahead. Ken Rogoff, thank you so much for joining us on Open Book.
Thank you for having me.
To have on Open Book today, Marianne Williamson. She's a best-selling author, spiritual leader, and a 2024 presidential candidate. She's run for president before. When I say best-selling author, you've written 15 books, Marianne, 4 of which have made #1 on the New York Times list. The only way I could get one of my books on that list, I'd have to buy all of them, Marianne, but I think they're on to people that try to do that, so I've never done that either.
Yeah, like someone else we know.
Well, exactly. Well, it's great to have you here. And you ran for the presidency in 2020. I always looked at that and said, wow, that's got to be an incredibly tough thing to do. Let's start there. Why did you decide? I mean, I sort of know the answer to this, but I want our viewers and listeners who may not be as familiar with you. Why did you decide to run? And listen, I think it's one of the toughest things to do in America is run for president. You know, the travel, the scrubbing that you get from the media, the thrubbing, all of that other stuff. So tell me why this brilliant, wonderful career you're transitioning into politics.
I think certain things need to be said, and I think certain things need to be done. And I think our political establishment is dominated by a conversation in which the most important things are not usually said, and the most important things are certainly not being done. Rather, the political establishment, the corporatist elements in both major parties, are enabling forces that are actually destroying our democracy. And I look around and I go, is anybody else going to run for president who's going to say this? And I didn't see anyone else coming across the hill. And I said, then I will.
Okay, so I have this theory, having been close to it, been burnt by it, and came into it relatively naive, which is hard for me to admit. You like to think of yourself as street smart and seasoned, but the world of politics is so different, at least in my opinion, than the world of business. There are different incentives, different angles of attack. But I feel like the American leadership now has totally lost the plot. They're there in this sort of fever bed of capitalism and cronyism, where lobbyists are paying them to do certain things. They only respond to you if you have money, bags of money. And if you have bags of money, you can get things done like put fertilizer into our food, overly process our food, add food dyes and different things to our food that you couldn't get done in a place like Europe, for example. Big Pharma has its way now with the FDA. The military industrial complex, we are running wars now, 50 years worth of wars. These wars are great for a very small group of people at the top, and they are very ungreat for the rest of the people, particularly the lower and middle class. And oh, by the way, if you're super wealthy and you get in trouble, it's no problem. We're going to lower interest rates, and we're going to give you unlimited amounts of capital from our treasury, so your bank can survive or you can stay rich. But we won't do that for the middle or lower income people. But what we do for them, though, is we cripple them with inflation and devaluation of our money. So if you're getting paid with your time and energy is going towards work, as opposed to you owning assets. The dollar that we put in your pocket is worth 92 cents a year later, and it makes it harder and harder for you to catch up. And so what have I missed, Marianne? Tell me what I've missed, or did I get that wrong? These are all public servants that are serving the American public, and the policies that they're coming up with are actually working for the average American.
You were 100% correct. And the only thing that I would modify was your first sentence. You said they've lost the plot. No, they haven't. They've changed the plot. They have changed the plot from democracy to oligarchy, because everything that you just described is an oligarchic system. You described a system in which relatively few people with a lot of money get to govern according to their goal, which is short-term profit maximization for themselves. And that is at the expense of democracy. And you described that situation perfectly. I think it's letting them off the hook too easily to say they've lost the plot. They have intentionally changed the plot, and they continue to do so. And they would have the American people think that qualified leadership is people qualified in maintaining and perpetuating what is essentially that scam.
Okay, so I ask people about you all the time. I say, well, what if somebody like Marianne Williamson was to run the government? And invariably, people say that would be wonderful if we had somebody like Marianne Williamson, because you would be doing it to serve people. You would not be doing it to serve yourself. I mean, I've read your books. I understand where you're coming from a spiritual point of view, and where you're coming from a human welfare point of view, and from a place of kindness. So I don't want to be overly cynical, but I want to just point this out. Why can't somebody like you crack through those atmospherics? Like, why are we choosing between demented and dementia? I mean, those are basically our choices for 2024, where if you asked 80% of the American people, I really don't want demented or dementia. I would like to have somebody that, cares about where we're going and would be focused on right or wrong. Okay, so go ahead. What am I getting wrong? Why can't we get somebody like you to break through that haze, if you will?
First of all, we can, but we're going to have to rise to the challenge. I think the majority of people, Anthony, are just processing all of this. I think a critical mass on both left and right are, as we speak, waking up to what you've said here, what I've agreed with, about the depth of corruption that now infuses our political system, and waking up to the fact that the institutional realities, namely public parties, which we were brought up to believe could be trusted to protect and expand our democratic pillars, are in fact the very problem in too many cases. So I think there has not been apathy. I think there's been confusion and an almost paralysis. But this is no different than in our own personal lives. If you go through something really big, you don't immediately jump into solution. You often say, wait, I got to think this through. Wait a minute. I got to think about this. And I think that's where the American people have been. It's like, wait, we got to think about this. No, we can't have her. We can't have her because she doesn't have all the, she's not a political car mechanic. And then you realize, well, no, but the problem is that we're on the wrong road. So that doesn't have to do with the political car mechanic. Well, could she actually do that? And then we go there because we've been sold that it's almost like a Wizard of Oz quality. You have to be one of them, like a Wizard of Oz. But then you realize, no, the wizard was just this guy with a mask on. We got to tear down the curtain. I'm reminded of a line from Franklin Roosevelt where he said that the primary responsibility of the presidency is not administrative, but moral vision. Moral leadership. And even when you say, can she run the government? The most important aspect of running the government at this moment is aligning the values that dominate policy back to our original values as articulated in the Declaration of Independence, which Lincoln said was an eternal rebuke to forces of tyranny and oppression. Right now, we're living in a country which is dominated by a system of economic tyranny. That is what you described. It's economic tyranny, except for a few people. So we don't need someone who's been for years involved in that system to continue to drive the car, so much as we need to disrupt that system, because the status quo will not disrupt itself.
Okay. So how do we do that? You are a visionary. You're an entrepreneur. You're a writer. You rebuilt yourself, Marianne. I mean, maybe we should tell people about your personal story, which I find to be so American.
Yeah, it is
You
very American.
you're the product of your own discipline and your own decision to recreate yourself, which is very emblematic to what the country sort of needs in terms of this American renewal. So let's go to your personal story for a minute. Tell our viewers and listeners a little bit about yourself and this transformation that you made over the course of your life to where you are now, and how
Well,
it could be impactful as a political leader.
well, I think that there's really nothing unique about my story, actually. I think my story, the only thing interesting about it is that it's not unique. But it has happened. It just so happens that my career and my life have taken me to so many different corners of our society, so many corners socioeconomically, so many corners geographically, and so many corners of human experience. There's nothing special about that. There's just something so varied about that. Now, I didn't so much transform myself. I just got very lucky, Anthony. I wrote a book and Oprah Winfrey liked it. You can't, that is, and she opened the world for me. So what that meant is I had access. Now, once I had that access, yes, I've worked very hard. I have worked very hard. And I think just as you've worked very hard, and everybody listening right now, I mean, we understand that. You have to, even if you're given opportunity, but you can't overstay what it means. And I think what I got from the Oprah experience, just as I got old enough to look back at my parents, old enough to look back at the fact that I went to decent public schools, old enough to look back and to realize what it means that there were good public libraries, old enough to look back and realize that when I was growing up, there was the minimum level of economic opportunity. I think what I've learned is that I got help. I've worked hard and I got help. I got help. And we don't give enough people, Martin Luther King said, if they give it to the poor, they call it a handout. If they give it to the rich, they call it a subsidy. You mentioned earlier, you articulated beautifully, you're rich, we got to handle. But if there are too many people locked out who are who have just as much entrepreneurial spirit as I've had, who want to work as hard as but people are locked out, and that's unsustainable. And that's what I've learned from my experience, is that I got help and I worked hard, but you can't leave out that I got help. And I want a society in which enough people are given the minimum help, particularly as children, that then it's reasonable to talk about them being accountable for their own circumstances because they had a shot at it. And to me, that's the American dream. The American dream is not that you can make it or I can make it or Barbara can make it or anybody else we know can make it. It's that we are responsible for a sacred trust, this sacred trust that there would be a possibility within a society of a place where anybody, if they worked hard enough, had a shot at it.
So, I mean, it's beautifully stated, and we are in a total agreement, because even my very rich friends who seem either ignorant or knowingly ignorant, willfully ignorant, or just uninterested, there is a level of the starting blocks now are so ridiculously unequal. The public school that I attended is still quite a good public school system, but frankly, it's in an affluent community. My dad was the crane operator out here on Long Island in a very affluent community. And so if you tell me the zip code of the kid, I can tell you whether or not they're getting a good public school education, right?
Absolutely.
But you and I both know that all of this is very uneven and very unfair, and we don't choose our parents. And so therefore, the country is rich enough where we could create a platform of equal opportunity for people, where there could be a package of things we provide to our citizens, whether it's healthcare or quality education, K through 12, so that they can at least get to the starting line. So,
exactly.
So why the callous indifference, though? You're a very empathic person. I've read several of your books, Return to Love, the book on miracles that you wrote. Why have we grown callous? Why, if I make that a conversation piece with somebody at a hoi polloi cocktail party, they groan and roll their eyes and tell me, yeah, well, that's not going to happen, and why, if we're not careful, Marianne, we're going to be living, the wealthy at least, are going to be living in these barbed-wired security
You're
compounds
absolutely
like they
correct,
do
with
in South
bodyguards
America.
even to go to the grocery store. That you're absolutely correct.
Correct.
All right,
So
so
why are we so? Why don't we want to help our neighbor like we did 100+ years ago, where Henry Ford, bad guy, I mean, obviously a racist and so forth, but he was like, you know what, I'm going to pay these workers enough money so that they can afford the car they're making, and I'm going to put them in a house, and they're going to have a good public school. This way they don't come after me with a tiki torch and a pitchfork while I'm trying to have my caviar in my mansion. Why
okay,
are we how do we lose sight of that?
okay, so what we lost sight of was the power of democracy. So let's talk about this for a minute. Jefferson said that the only safe repository for power in this country is in the hands of the people. I believe that the majority of American people would agree with what you and I were saying. So when you say, how did we, everything you described was the people at those fancy cocktail parties. I'm sorry. Not every rich person is a greedy bastard. But the group of people that you're talking about who have lost so much empathy, who are living in this bubble that emotionally buffers them from the suffering that is so endemic in this society today, they should not be in control to the extent to which they are controlled. In control, that is what an oligarchy is. I believe that the majority of American people would agree with everything you and I have said. The American people are not the problem. We are decent people. The majority of American people want our kids to go to decent schools where they're not worried about getting shot at school, where there's not carcinogens in our food and forever chemicals in our water and pesticides in our food and all the things that you've described. The problem is we have a sclerotic political system that is sitting on top of the will of the people, so that the will of the people is being suppressed. And instead, the will of the people at the cocktail parties you're talking about is holding sway because of the money, that their undue financial influence. How they lost the plot, there's somebody told me the other day, there's this term, have you heard this term, ethical fading? You heard that term recently?
I haven't, but explain it to me.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's when people either they get too powerful or they get too much money or there's too much concentration on stockholder value or whatever it is in somebody's life, and they start making an ethical compromise. And it's usually not a big ethical compromise. It's a little ethical compromise, and it's just ethical fading until you've got a situation where nobody's just saying, "Hey, wait a minute, we can't do this. It could hurt a child." But I go back to what I said before, and I think this is so important. I think the majority of American people are in touch with human suffering and human empathy. The problem is the political system that does not now work to serve the will of the people. And the only way to override this, and I say this as a candidate because I've seen this up close and personal, the only way to override this is with a revolution at the ballot box. Because otherwise the system is locked up by everything that you've described here.
That's fascinating. Let's talk about Return to Love for a second, if you don't mind, okay, because I love that book.
Thank you.
And I think you are basically, as I look through your presidential platform and watch your interviews, you're basically applying that book, okay, to your presidential campaign. So, and what I love about your campaign, by the way, and the reason why I wanted to have you on is if we can just get your message out there to more candidates. It doesn't just have to be candidates for the presidency, but candidates for town supervisor or candidates for the Senate or the House. It could have a transitional positive effect. It could reverse some of the trends that you're describing. So let's talk about Return to Love and applying those lessons, and give our listeners and viewers a sense for what I mean.
Before I do that, if I may, You said it could have a transitional positive effect. We don't have time for a transitional positive effect. I think part of the characterological shift that is necessary at this point is a recognition of the urgency of this moment. That's number one. Number two,
Okay, fair enough. I accept that.
So the bottom line is simply that we're here to love one another. You see a hungry child, you feed them. You see carcinogens in the food, you remove them. You see somebody who's rationing their insulin, you pass universal health care. You see people who are burdened in their 20s with tens of thousands of college loan debts that should never have even existed, you cancel the debt. You see people wanting an education to better their lives, to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You have tuition-free college and tech school like every other advanced democracy. You see people who are working at jobs that they hate because it's the only way that they can even imagine being able to pay for childcare. You have subsidized childcare. You have mothers crying, depressed, and anxiety because millions of years of evolution have told them it's too early to leave the baby after the birth of the child. You have paid family leave. You have people who are 1/3 of your workforce living on less than $15 an hour, and half of them unable to find a place to live. You have a guaranteed living wage. And I also want to point out, Anthony, that everything that I just described is considered in every advanced European democracy except ours, which is not European, obviously, a moderate position. People do not realize how far the Overton window has moved from that first principle, which is that the government's job is to broker a balance between individual liberty, which includes economic liberty, and the concern for the common good. We now have the policy after policy that is passed in ways that you have mentioned to help those who have already accumulated capital accumulate more at the expense of the majority of Americans who are literally struggling just to make it at all. And the level of personal and societal dysfunction that inevitably arises from this and is arising, our suicide rates, our lower life expectancy, people dying from lack of health care, deaths of despair, diseases of despair, people's lives are falling apart. And that system does not care in the same way that you described that cocktail party. They roll their eyes at what you and I are saying. That's fine. They shouldn't be in charge. They should have the same weight of influence that every other democracy. That every other citizen. That's what democracy is supposed to be. That whether you're rich or you're poor, you get to weigh in and have the same influence. And that is what we've lost in this country. And that is why we are where we are.
Okay, it's very, very well said. And when I listen to you, I'm like, okay, that's exactly the right message or the right vision. So how do we convert that into winning? Tell me how we're going to win the campaign.
Okay. Well, I want to point out that I was just before I got on, I saw the latest poll that said I'm at 11%. The Emerson poll the other day said I'm at 10. And I'd like to, in politics, I'm sure you know this, it's kind of like when you're in elementary school and you turn 10 years old and they say, "Ooh, you're double digits now." For whatever reason, double digits really matters in politics, right? When you consider the complete media blackout. So what Fox is to the GOP, CNN, and MSNBC are to the Democratic Party. There's been a complete media blackout. They won't have me on CNN. They won't have me on MSNBC. So even though I'm higher in the polls than, let's say, Nikki Haley or even Vivek Ramaswamy, they are regularly on the Sunday news shows. They are regularly on MSN and CNN. So what I have to do is I have to override that with bought media. And independent media, such as things, and I'm grateful to be on your show today. So I need a quick million, if 1,000 people will give $1,000 or 2,000 people will give $500. I know that a lot of this is not mystery. It's math. Do I have the money? I have the campaign. We just need to scale up. I'll have one staff member on something where I should have 3. I'll have one office when we should have 3. I'll have 2 people on a team that should have 6. It's not mysterious, but wherever I go, we get the interest, we get the standing ovations, we get all that. My problem is that too many people don't even know that my campaign exists. So the answer to your question is it's happening. It's happening despite that, but obviously we don't have a lot of time, and we need people to volunteer. We need people to go to marianne2024.com, volunteer, spread the word, get on social media, and obviously give financial support where they can.
Well, and give us the website just so everybody has it.
Thank you. Marianne, that's MARIANNE 2024.com.
Okay. I want to go back to this era, this age of cynicism that we're in.
Yeah.
So you're not being put on. So that obviously is a material block, but that fits the oligarch narrative, right? And by the way, if Vivek Ramaswamy, and no offense to Vivek, I've listened to him. I think he's inexperienced. He doesn't have like the. You have something that we're sorely needed. You have something called savoir faire. Okay, you're going to do the right thing in any circumstance, or at least try to do the right thing in every circumstance. So, Vivek, I'm going to give him the opportunity to come on the show, as I've given all presidential candidates come on the show. But I would say this right to his face: he lacks experience and he lacks touch and empathy for people. But they put him on. They put him on because he's a person of color, okay, and they put him on because he's not at 20% of the polls. If he was at 25% in the polls, Marianne, they would knock him with a ray gun as hard as they possibly could. And so I guess what I'm wondering is, this oligarchical system that we have now, has it made it impossible for a reformer?
Absolutely, because of the media conglomeratization. When I was a child, the same company could not own the newspaper and the radio and the television because it was guaranteed, they codified it into law, that there would be a diversification of opinion. Today, we have a matrix of corporate overlords, and part of that matrix is major media empires. Now, I used to think that the political parties chopped wood and carried water for these multi-billion-dollar industries, and I've come to realize, no, they are one of those multi-billion-dollar industries. So you're right, there's a blockage, and everything that you and I have been talking about, I think this is important. The majority of Republicans as well as Democrats want universal health care. Poll after poll shows that. The majorities of Republicans as well as Democrats want tuition-free college and tech school, which we had until the 1970s. Polls show that. The majority of Republicans as well as Democrats, and including the majority of gun owners, want more common sense gun laws. The problem is they don't want anybody speaking a message like this because they know it could start a political wildfire and it overthrows their perch. This really is a second American revolution. It's a revolution of consciousness. It's a revolution at the ballot box. But if anybody who thinks we can just continue to vote for the status quo of either major party and make these incremental changes, then it's simply a matter of whether your democracy is in a nosedive or in a managed decline.
Many issues right now. We have global issues. We have domestic issues. Take me through the top 2 or 3 domestically and the top 2 or 3 internationally that you would work on immediately.
Domestically, we need an economic bill of rights. Franklin Roosevelt said there are 4 freedoms, and 2 of them are freedom from want. They're the freedoms of speech, religion, protest, etc. And then there's freedoms from. He said the freedoms from want and from fear. 1 in 4 Americans live with medical debt. 68,000 dying every year because they have no health care. 18 million Americans can't afford to pay the prescription drugs that their doctors give them. 85 million Americans underinsured or uninsured. So we need Medicare for all, universal health care like in every other advanced democracy. We need a guaranteed living wage. Our minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. People talk about lifting it to 15, but we have in every major city in America, the living wage is at least $20 an hour. So the Economic Bill of Rights would include the things I mentioned before. And that's, of course, on my website. It's the issue of the tuition-free college, paid family leave, a guaranteed sick pay, et cetera. I also think we need to end the war on drugs. We spent $1 trillion on that since 1971. We know that Richard Nixon knew that it was not public enemy number one. It has not helped this country. It has is actually exacerbated the problem of drug addiction. We had 300,000 people in prison when I was in college. Today, there are 2.3 million, and 46% of our federal prisoners are nonviolent drug offenders. For the $100 billion that we spend right now every year, we could spend a fraction of that money on a world-class network of recovery options. We should be treating drug addiction, which is an ubiquitous problem in this country. However, we should be treating it not as a criminal issue, but as a health issue, like they do in countries like Portugal. I also think we need a Department of Children and Youth. We have children, Anthony, who are traumatized before preschool. I have met principals at elementary schools who say that they have elementary school students on suicide watch. In public schools around this country, we have what they call trauma rooms. We're talking about trauma-informed education, but I talk about root causes. Why are so many American children traumatized to begin with? I think that America's children, because they're not old enough to vote, they have no constituency, they're not old enough to work, so they have no financial leverage. And I see them as the biggest collateral damage of this unfettered vulture crony capitalism that we have today. I also think we need to declare a climate emergency. This is the time to be ramping down, not ramping up fossil fuel extraction. And as we make a just transition from a dirty economy to a clean economy, we will actually create millions of jobs. And I think that no matter what you're talking about, whether you're talking about criminal justice issues, whether you're talking about racial justice issues, whether you're talking about drugs, whether you're talking about food, no matter what, you cannot overstate the role that economic insecurity and anxiety is playing as a root cause. And people's lives are falling apart. And when people's lives are falling apart, you're talking about large groups of desperate people. That's a national security risk. Because when you have large groups of desperate people in any system, they become a petri dish. And out of that petri dish, all manner of personal and societal dysfunction is almost inevitable, including vulnerability to genuinely psychotic forces. And that's what fascism represents in this country. Franklin Roosevelt said we wouldn't have to worry about a fascist takeover as long as democracy delivered on its promises. So the biggest problem is that democracy is not delivering on its promises. And if the Democrats do not offer a real alternative to fascism in 2024, a more inspiring agenda that viscerally improves their lives immediately, then we're going to be in terrible, terrible problem. And it could even be the end of our democracy.
It's interesting because you've mentioned Roosevelt a number of times, and one of my favorite presidents for so many different reasons. But the main reason was he was a leader in the sense that he was setting a course.
That's exactly right.
Not to use a rough metaphor, but there are now thermometers. They're testing the temperature of the country, and then they're reflecting the heat or the rhetoric in the country. Roosevelt was like, okay, we got to get the temperature from 90
That's exactly
to 72.
Right. We're going to do it because I said
and
so.
I'm going to take you there, and I'm going to explain to you how to get there. And it's very famous fireside chats and the whole discussion about Lend-Lease and giving the garden hose to somebody who had their house on fire and all of these great common analogies. And of course, he had his great struggle with paralysis. Some people actually think it was Guillain-Barré syndrome and not polio because he got it so late in life. There's a big discussion medically about what it was that he was actually afflicted with. But the point was he spent.
I've never heard that before. What syndrome?
Guillain-Barré, Guillian Barré, Barre syndrome, which sometimes is a syndrome post-virus where the body. The autoimmune system attacks the nervous system.
Yeah. Of course, when you think about it, the medical testing, the level of medical testing, we do know that he went to a park that day for a political rally that he felt he wasn't supposed to go to. He didn't listen to his own inner guidance, and he used a public water fountain. He came home that day, he took a nap, and basically he was never able to walk again after that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So again, Jay Winnick in the book 1944 was interesting because he suggested in that book that because of his age 39, it may not have been infantile paralysis because that seemed to be a disease that was afflicting people at younger ages. I'm not saying it wasn't polio.
Mm-hmm.
That was the idea of it. But the reason I'm bringing it up is just that if you think of what he had to overcome as a human being and to rise to the presidency, it was monumental, but he was up to monumental tasks. And so
Well,
that's the reason why I find what you're saying, your messaging so interesting because we need somebody monumental right at this moment who's up for this sort of monumental task.
well, it's wonderful talking to someone who shares my deep interest in Roosevelt because there's so much to what you're saying. He was tall, dark, handsome, governor of New York. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt's nephew, a Roosevelt, a Delano. I mean, he had, he was more one of those people at the cocktail party that you described. And his having to triumph over polio. And also, or whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
And then his going down to Georgia and people who had never even heard of him, who didn't see him as a fancy person, Roosevelt, because they didn't even know what that meant at that time, particularly. They saw him just as another sufferer, and the empathy that they showed to him. There are so many ways that we can see his life experience prepared him to have the hugeness of heart and the hugeness and strength of character to show up for that moment in history the way he did. It's so fascinating. And you're right.
Yeah, listen, no,
Roosevelt. This is a moment when we need a Rooseveltian figure. Absolutely. And also, I'd like to say something else to what you were saying. When you were talking before about thermometers, I was reading the other day about the German poet Heinrich Heine, and somebody was talking to him about the fact that the old cathedrals in Europe took hundreds of years to build. And so that meant that people spent their entire lives working on a project that they knew they would never see completed in their lifetime. And somebody was asking Heinrich Heine about what force or facet of character does it take for someone to be willing to work their entire lives on something that will give them personally no particular satisfaction other than that they participated. And he said, and he was talking about the 1800s, what he called the modern age, the 1800s. Think how much this applies today. He said it's the difference between men of conviction, which they had, and what we have today, he said, which is men who only have opinions. And that's exactly what you were talking about. We need someone with conviction.
Listen, I think it's brilliant. Well, I'm a huge Rooseveltian fan, and you may have read these books. So I'm going to offer them up as a suggestion to you. Nigel Hamilton. There's been so many great biography of Roosevelt, but Nigel Hamilton decided that he would write the war memoirs, and so. Unfortunately, Franklin Roosevelt did not get a chance to write his own memoirs the way Winston Churchill did. And so he started at the beginning of the war. He took all of his documents, all of his papers. He got access to his diary, the presidential diary that his two assistants were taking in shorthand and stenography. And he put together a 3-volume series, which is it's a box set now, but it's a brilliant series. Started in 2014. Last book, I think, was written in 2019, but it really talked about the decisions that he had to make during the war and also the illness that he was faced with and how he picked his leaders and how he made decisions about who, the very famous one, I know you're familiar with it because I just tell by the way you're thinking of Roosevelt, the way he asked George Marshall, he felt that George Marshall deserved to run Operation Overlord, which was the D-Day invasion. But he felt more comfortable with him in Washington. He felt he needed him in Washington. And he went to him and told him, I'm sorry, I need you here. We're going to let Ike run this. And it was just this wonderful command of the English language, but this sentiment of understanding human beings. And his his ability to interact with them in a way where they admired him. What did Oliver Wendell Holmes say about Franklin Roosevelt? He said he had he may have had a second-rate intellect because he got C's at Harvard. This was Oliver Wendell Holmes's joke. He may have had a second-rate intellect, but he had a first-rate temperament. It was a first-class temperament, and of course Roosevelt responded to that by saying, "Well, that's because I wasn't trying at Harvard," and he clearly had a first-rate intellect as well. But it's just so sorely needed today. I mean, just people that even can't even talk in complete sentences. Okay, so unfortunately, I'm in overtime. I promised to get you out of here in 30 minutes, but I'm already in overtime. So I want to go to the 5 words that I leave all my authors with. And basically, I've chosen these 5 words with my production team. You react to them. You give me a 1 word, a sentence, 5 words, whatever you want, a paragraph. So let's go with the first one.
May I just say one more thing about Roosevelt? There's another wonderful book by Doris Kearns Goodwin called No Ordinary Time.
No Ordinary Time.
Which I totally love. And what you just said about the ordinary intellect with the first-rate temperament, I think also was true of Eisenhower. That's number 1. And also, one of the things that they said about Roosevelt, which I think also relates to what you and I were talking about before, what he had to triumph over in his own life. So many of the people around him said, even when things are the worst, when it looks like there's no hope, and if you think this person was saying, we in the room thought there was no hope, and he probably knew so much more information even than we did about how there was no hope. He said he always left you at every meeting thinking it was going to be okay, and we were going to make it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I love it. And what an interesting dynamic. You mentioned No Ordinary Time. So what an interesting dynamic he and his wife had. Of course, they had their ups and downs in their marriage and more or less lived separate lives after Lucy Rutherford and the affair that he had at the early part of his life. But the truth of the matter is they were together and they respected and admired each other. And he used her successfully politically. She used her legs to get around the country and the world, frankly, in a way that he couldn't because of his invalid status. And it's just it's a fascinating group of people. And America has always had that person, Marianne. We had Washington at its inception. We had Lincoln at the point of breakage, when the country needed to be re-sanctified and reunified. We had Roosevelt during the Depression and the Great Second World War. And we need that now. We need somebody now. So this is why I'm so delighted that you decided to come on. So here are the 5 words. Okay, you ready?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say the word Democrat, and you react by saying what?
It doesn't now seem to be the party that I grew up with. And I think of myself as a Roosevelt Democrat, and I'm running as a Democrat because I hope for the Democratic Party as well as for the Republican Party that the parties can return to their own souls, to the high-minded principles that at one point infused them. Today, the corporatist perspective has completely taken over the Republican Party, and it dominates the establishment leadership of the Democratic Party. So when I think Democrat, I think hope that the Democratic Party will retrieve its role as it was under Roosevelt of unequivocal advocacy for the working people of the United States. And I hope the DNC will stop messing with me so that I can have a fair shot at this primary.
Yeah, that's part of the oligarchical nature of the whole thing. When you hear the word Republican, you think corporatist? What? I want you to take that down the line of Republican.
Listen, Eisenhower said that the American mind at its best is both liberal and conservative. When I was growing up, more than not, there were liberal Republicans when I was growing up. And so there was a time when the Republican Party, more than not, was a home for high-minded conservative values. And the Democratic Party was the home, more than not, for high-minded liberal values. And so my hope for the Republican Party, as well as for the Democratic, is that it retrieves their souls. Right now, I have very, very little respect for the Republican Party.
Okay. I got to use this word, Biden.
Incremental. Credit where credit is due. He defeated Trump in 2020. I believe he's a very weak candidate going forward. His numbers are dropping as we speak. Even with all of Trump's indictments, the president has had a hard time even consistently breaking even with Trump in the polls. I believe his greatest service to the country right now would be to bow out, as he had said that he would, and to let a different crop of candidates come in, of which I obviously believe I would be the wisest choice.
Okay. 2024.
Decisive, critical.
And if you were going to describe a woman by the name of Marianne Williamson, what would you say?
Trying my best. Decent. With the help of people and God, capable of doing great things.
Yeah, I would add aspirational. I think ultimately, for the country to succeed, we need aspiration for all people. And I think you represent that, Marianne. I'm very, very happy that you joined me today on Open Book. I want to thank you, and hopefully I can get you back on as we get into campaign season, which is going to start to heat up here.
Thank you. Thank you.
It was a real honor for me to have you on.